and I didn't remember her name. Now, I do that all the time, for men and women.
I'm sorry. Do you recall that you sent Nancy Hernreich to get her telephone number?
No, I don't.
All right. Do you recall having received her telephone number, calling her that night?
No, sir, I don't.
Do you recall inviting her to meet with you at your hotel that night?
No, sir, I do not.
Do you recall where you stayed in Richmond, Virginia during the debate you told us about?
Well, I stayed at some hotel there, I believe.
Actually, did you stay at the Williamsburg Inn, not in Richmond?
Yeah, that's right. We prepared in Williamsburg. That's correct. I believe we prepared in Williamsburg and then went to Richmond for the debate, and then I think we spent the night in Richmond, and the next day I think we had a rally before we left town. I believe that's right.
Do you know of any reason Kathleen Willey's telephone number would appear on your toll records from your room in Williamsburg?
No,
you didn't call her.
No, I'm not denying that I called her, sir. You asked me a specific question. I won't deny that I called her. I don't know whether I did or not.
Matter of fact, you called her twice that day, didn't you, sir?
I don't recall. I may well have done it, and I don't know why I did it.
Well, does it refresh your recollection that you called her and invited her to come to your room that night, sir?
I don't believe I did that, sir.
If Kathleen Willey has said that, she's mistaken or lying. Is that correct, Mr. President?
I do not believe I did that. That's correct.
But what is your best recollection of that conversation, those conversations?
I don't remember talking to her, but it seems to me that at some point, this is why I believe I'd met her before, too. But at some point, I had some actual person-to-person conversation with her about my sore throat and what she thought would be good for it or something like that. I have some vague memory of that. That's it.
Is this the chicken soup conversation, Mr. President?
Well, I don't know if I recall. Maybe that's what she said I should have. I don't remember. But I have no recollection, sir, of asking her to come to my room. I'm sorry, I don't. I won't deny calling her. I don't know if I did call her. I don't know if she tried to call me first. I don't know anything about that. I met her and Doug Wilder. I remember that she and her husband were active for Governor Wilder, and that's about all I remember, except that I had a conversation with her around the Richmond debate. I do remember talking to her there.
Mr. President, let's move ahead to the episode on November 29, 1993, in which Mrs. Willey met you in your office at the Oval. The subject matter of the 60 Minutes broadcast a few months ago. You recall that episode?
I certainly do.
Mr. President, in fact, on that day, you did make sexual advances on Kathleen Willey. Is that not correct?
That's false.
You did grab her breast, as she said.
I did not.
You did place your hand on her groin area, as she said.
No, I didn't.
And you placed her hand on your genitals, did you not?
Mr. Bennett, I didn't do any of that. And the questions you're asking, I think, betray the bias of this operation that has troubled me for a long time. You know what evidence was released after the 60 Minutes broadcast that I think pretty well shattered Kathleen Willey's credibility. You know what people down in Richmond said about her. You know what she said about other people that wasn't true. I don't know if you've made all this available to the grand jury or not. She was not telling the truth. She asked for the appointment with me. She asked for it repeatedly.
Did she make a sexual advance on you, Mr. President?
On that day, no, she did not. She was troubled.
On some other day?
I wouldn't call it a sexual advance. She was always very friendly, but I never took it seriously.
Mr. President, you mentioned the documents that were released and information that came out from people in Richmond, et cetera, after the 60 Minutes piece was broadcast. As a matter of fact, you were required under the court's rulings to produce those documents in response to document requests by the Jones litigants. Is that correct?
No, I believe the Jones litigants' request for production of documents to me ran the documents that were in my personal files and in my personal possession and did not cover documents that were White House files. So I don't believe we were required to produce them. As a matter of fact, when that story first ran, sir, before 60 Minutes was back in July or so of '97, I was aware that we had some letters. I didn't dream Kathleen Willey. I didn't remember that she'd written us as much as she had and called as much as she had and asked to see me as often as she had after this alleged incident. I didn't know the volume of contact that she had, which undermined the story she has told. But I knew there was some of it. And I made a decision that I did not want to release it voluntarily to her after the Newsweek ran the story, because her friend Julie Steele was in the story saying she, Kathleen Willey, asked her to lie. And because, frankly, her husband had committed suicide, she apparently was out of money. And I thought, who knows how anybody would react under that? So I didn't. But now when 60 Minutes came with the story and everybody blew it up, I thought we would release it. But I do not believe we were required to release White House documents to the Jones lawyers.
Mr. President, have you made a decision on whether to stay beyond the 4 hours we agreed to accept questions from the grand jury?
We have made an agreement, Mr. Bennett, to give you 4 hours. We're going to do that. By my watch, there are about 12 minutes left.
I guess that's no. Is that correct, Mr. Kendall?
Yes, that's correct.
Let me ask you a question. Could I have a 2-minute break?
Sure.
We'll get to it. Thanks. I'm sorry to bother you, but I know we're getting to the end, but I need...
So another break. There's about 15 minutes of this left, 12 to 15 minutes of this left, which we'll be playing very shortly. The Dow Jones Industrial Averages have rallied and are now down 79 points. They started the morning off down by about 168 or 170. Now, this just in from Washington. Remember, this comes from documentation that was sent to Congress along with his videotape. Independent counsel Kenneth Starr says he's now investigating the duplication and possible tampering of 9 secret tape recordings made by Linda Tripp of conversations with Monica Lewinsky about Lewinsky's alleged affair with President Clinton. This is according to the documents released today. This follows on the heels of the revelation that Miss Lewinsky said that it was Miss Tripp who got her to save the now infamous dress, and according to Miss Lewinsky, suggested she might put it in a safety deposit box. Let's go to Washington and CBS News correspondent Phil Jones. Phil, Linda Tripp, the so-called, quote, betraying friend, now comes full circle again as a very important witness in this whole affair.
Well, Dan, the importance of what you're pointing out is that Linda Tripp, if she knew anything about the duplication, whether she was involved herself in doing it or just knew about it, the independent counsel in the documentation we received says that she has then lied under oath, and she would have a big legal problem.
Phil Jones in Washington. Now, we come to the last 15 minutes or so of the president's testimony before the grand jury on August 17th. The president asked for about a 2-minute break after the prosecutors had, in effect, asked him if he could go beyond the 4-hour mark. The president's attorney said no, so now we come up to the last 15 minutes of the questioning.
Mr. President, at various times in this investigation, officials have invoked executive privilege in response to questions that have been posed to them by the grand jury and in the grand jury. One of the grand jurors has posed the question, did you personally authorize the invocation of executive privilege?
If the answer is authorized, I think the answer to that would be yes. But I would like the grand jury to know something. In the cases where we raise the lawyer-client privilege or executive privilege, or where the Secret Service raised their privilege, and when I had nothing to do with that. I did not authorize it, approve it, or anything else. That was something they asked to be free to make their decision on by themselves. In none of those cases did I actually have any worry about what the people involved would say. The reason those privileges were advanced and litigated was that I believed that there was an honest difference between Judge Starr and the Office of Independent Counsel and Mr. Ruff, my counsel, and I about what the proper balance was in the constitutional framework. And I did not want to put the presidency at risk of being weakened as an institution without having those matters litigated. Now, we've lost some of those matters. Our people have testified, and the grand jury is free to conclude whether they believe that the testimony they gave was damaging to me. But I don't imagine it was, and I wasn't worried about it. It was an honest difference of constitutional principle between Judge Starr and the Office of Independent Counsel in the White House.
Mr. President, a couple of very brief questions given our time. The White House's outside counsel, Mr. Eggleston, withdrew the White House's appeal from Chief Judge Johnson's ruling that the invocation of executive privilege had to give way to the grand jury's right to the information. That ruling in connection with the testimony of Mr. Blumenthal and Mr. Lindsay. Were you informed of that fact, that the appeal had been withdrawn?
I was informed of it, and as a matter of fact, I was consulted about it, and I strongly supported it. I didn't want to appeal it. I have my main difference, Judge Starr, as you know, with you and with some of the court decisions, is on the extent to which members of the White House counsel staff, like Mr. Lindsay, should be able to counsel the president on matters that may seem like they're private, like the Jones case, but inevitably intrude on the daily work of the president. But I didn't really want to advance an executive privilege claim in this case beyond having it litigated so that we had not given up on principle this matter without having some judge rule on it. So
excuse me, and you're satisfied that you now have the benefit of that ruling, is that correct?
Well, yes, I just didn't want to, I didn't want to, yes, and I actually, I think, made the call, or at least I supported the call. I strongly felt we should not appeal your victory on the executive privilege issue.
Thank you.
Mr. President, among the many remaining questions of the grand jurors is one that they would like answered directly without relation to, without regard to inferences, which is the following. Did Monica Lewinsky perform oral sex on you? They would like a direct answer to that, yes or no.
Well, that's not the first time that question's been asked, but since I believe, and I think any person, reasonable person would believe, that that is not covered in the definition of sexual relations I was given, I'm not going to answer except to refer to my statement. I had intimate contact with her that was inappropriate. I do not believe any of the contacts I had with her violated the definition I was given. Therefore, I believe I did not do anything but testify truthfully on these matters.
We have a couple of photos of the tie that you wore.
Yeah, would you please give them to me?
Yes.
Now, this is this August 6th, is that correct?
1998, the day that Monica Lewinsky appeared at the grand jury. And my question to you on that is, were you sending some kind of a signal to her by wearing
No, sir.
one of the ties? Let me finish if you don't mind.
Sure, I'm sorry. I apologize.
Were you sending some kind of a signal to her by wearing a tie she had given you on the day that she appeared in front of the grand jury?
No, sir. I don't believe she gave me this tie. And if I was sending a signal, I'm about to send a terrible signal, and maybe you ought to invite her to talk again. I don't want to make light about this. I don't believe she gave me this tie. I don't remember her giving me this tie. And I had absolutely no thought of this in my mind when I wore it. If she did, I don't remember it, and this is the very first I've ever heard of it.
Did you realize when you, can I just have for the record, what are the exhibit numbers?
Yeah, there should be Jason 5 and 6.
All right. Mr. Bennett has some more questions.
Mr. President, we were talking about your responses to document requests in the Jones litigation, and I had just asked you about turning over the Kathleen Willey correspondence. You recall that?
Yes, sir, I do.
And if I understand your testimony, you did not believe that the request for documents compelled you to search for those documents in the White House?
Mr. Bennett, I want to